Hi, I'm Chike Coleman, and that's Sanford, and this is Real Reviews Rewind, the show where we rewind the clock a little bit and talk about some older movies.
Especially
This
during the
week's,
pandemic.
yeah, the pandemic of sorts. Real Reviews Rewind, the home edition. Essentially, this week, we're talking about two more movies that are completely unrelated to each other, but it's still martial arts May, so we are covering yet another martial arts film, probably the most famous one in the canon of martial arts films, Enter the Dragon, but we're also talking about the hilarious, funny, vibrant craziness that is Girls Trip. But the first movie I want to talk about today is Enter the Dragon. And I'm not doing the plot summaries this week because I wouldn't dare try that. I've left that horrible duty to Sanford. So tell us about Enter the Dragon.
All right. Well, Enter the Dragon opens with our introduction to Bruce Lee, who is apparently the baddest dude at his Shaolin temple of martial arts. And actually, I got to give huge compliments to the way the plot kicked off. I loved it. He's in Hong Kong, so the British authorities are in some way involved in this, and they reach out to him because they want to put him undercover, and he's going to basically do three things all at once. He's going to help them with this suspicious guy who's running an island, the mysterious Mr. Han. And then the second thing is Mr. Han also happens to be the only person who's ever left their temple and used his skills for evil, and happens to be involved with the death of Bruce Lee's sister. So all three of those things come together, and Bruce Lee is entered into the tournament of martial arts that goes on at this island. And the movie kind of moves into a slow part then of moving into the island where he takes a boat with the other people who are there for the tournament, and we're introduced to some of the other characters. Some of them are better developed than others, but the three primary characters are played by Jim Kelly and John Saxon as two Americans who seem to know each other, although we never explained why they knew each other.
Yeah, no.
I thought they were going to do some Vietnam thing, honestly, on that.
I actually thought the same thing, to be honest. Given the time period it takes place in, that would actually been a nice little tiny plot thread, but they didn't use that.
Right. So, but and actually, and also at the same time, they do some backstories on the different characters, which I enjoyed. I mean, I really liked the fact that we kind of knew, for example, John Saxon, comes in, he's completely in debt, he's broke, he's living beyond his means, and it actually explained his character and some of the decisions that he made. But cutting to the chase, as we should, because that's what this movie does. It dumps the people onto the island, and from there, we sort of have two things unfolding at the same time. One is the martial arts contest, which actually becomes a secondary plot item. And then more importantly, Bruce Lee learns the secret of the island in terms of what's really going on there, heroin. And therefore, from that point forward, we sort of wind up with the big, huge climactic fight scene that everybody knows is coming. And along the way,
Except
there's actually...
for me.
Sorry?
Except for me, I had no idea.
You had no idea. Okay. Yeah, I love the fact that on this island, surrounding, all these guys are in white, all the people who support Mr. Han, and happen to have in the prisons there, for no explicable reason, a bunch of other martial artists who are all wearing black. So that when the big fight scene inevitably comes, it's easy to keep track of who's who, which is actually really nice.
It's football, martial arts style.
Yeah. We already saw that last week.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So anyway,
man,
cutting to the chase on this one, the climactic fight scenes happen, including Bruce Lee squaring off against the mysterious Mr. Han, who I thought this was nice too, is missing one of his hands. And so he has a series of weapons that he can sort of plug onto where his hand goes, which, in some way makes him competitive with Bruce Lee. But, come on, who are we kidding?
That's the thing, is like, that may be the only detail that I know about this movie. Was
I had
the
never
guy
seen...
had no hand.
Yeah.
That's the one detail that anybody knows about Enter the Dragon, is that at some point Lee gets scratched
The three
by Han,
scratches, yeah.
and you know from there, crap's going down. Um, so let me first off start by saying this. This movie reminded me of a mix of Super Cop
Which we watched 2 weeks ago.
meets Doctor No,
Mmm. Nice.
and I wanted to love this movie. Love Bruce Lee. Love all of his facial expressions. Love the time it takes to actually get into a fight and watching the fight play out. But a bunch of different small things didn't stick with me. Like Lee's attitude throughout the film was just like, I'm gonna make this happen. I'm gonna get things done, and I trust my cohorts that are on this adventure with me. But it's kind of one of those things. Not that it's no big deal, because he killed my sister, and I absolutely want revenge. But like, I, my emotional investment in the lead character was like this thin.
Well, I mean, so I agree with you on that because I think Bruce Lee is he's a strong character, but he's not that likable.
Really, that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and which to a certain extent, thank goodness that they have these other characters, the Jim Kelly character and the John Saxon character, because, you actually had some, I don't know, some personality in those two. And there was some, even some humor and some bantering with the girls and stuff like that, that because Bruce Lee, I mean, and, I'm going to go here with Jackie Chan as a comparison. Jackie Chan has a humor to him and is able to, he's emoting more than just being a badass in the fight scenes.
Right.
And I agree with you on that, where Bruce Lee just kind of, he's there, but he's cold.
Yeah, Lee is overly stoic. And that's nothing to do, I think, with Lee as a person, because if you watch behind the scenes clips, if you watch documentaries about Lee, he has way more personality than he ever showed on screen. But I think that's, and I'm sorry to say this, but I'm going to have to. I think that's representative of the culture of how Hollywood wanted to see Asian Americans at that time.
So let's talk about that for a second, because this was an American movie essentially, or at least it was in English. It was, it had higher production values than you would see in some, martial arts movies. This was an American film. And I think you're right. That's an interesting point, is that then, he's being fed into the Hollywood machine.
Well, not only that, but I feel like they were going for more of a tone represented by, a Western, except without the Western cliches. They wanted a stoic hero like, Clint Eastwood in those Western movies, but they wanted more of the action to keep the audience invested, but they didn't know how to build the story around that. So they said, let's just make a stoic hero and have the audience watch what he does. Now, it works for the financial purposes of this movie. This is one of the most well-known martial arts movies of all time. But from a story perspective and from a character perspective, it's one of the weaker ones we've seen, because we're so used to that humor, that lightness, or that dramatic anger that we've seen in other martial artists that make us emotionally connect with that character. And it has nothing to do with what year this movie was actually made, and everything to do with how the story and the characters connect, or in this case, a lack of connection. Is this a brilliant movie? Technically speaking, I would argue yes. From a story character perspective, no. As somebody who was a manager of an art theater and a projectionist, does this movie appeal to your senses? Is this something that you're drawn more to or pulled away from?
Oh, well, I mean, I always judge each genre on its, against its peers, right? So as a martial arts movie, this one has far better production values, and and look, the fight scenes, I mean, especially the one-on-one fight scenes are amazing. I mean, not so much the group fight scenes; those get a little silly. But the one-on-one fight scenes, which Bruce Lee choreographed, are excellent. And going back to, some thoughts I expressed kind of against the Romeo Must Die that we saw, there's no wire work in this movie. This is just really impressive athletes who are doing a great job, and making it very believable. The one-on-one fighting. I was not as entranced by the other. So, to me, you got to judge each genre on its against its peers. And as a martial arts movie, this one's really good. But, again, that's kind of a weak comparison, especially if you're judging against other martial arts movies of the 70s, which, the vast majority of them are horrible production values.
To get anywhere close to good, you have to basically be Enter the Dragon.
Right. But, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit about, I'd never seen this movie before, which I was really glad to have the opportunity to watch it. I liked it. I mean, I agree with you that Bruce Lee is a pretty much of a cold fish in this character. And I think you make some interesting points about that being an intentional direction. But I enjoyed this. And I think for me, what made it more pleasurable was that the plot actually had it made sense. Even Super Cop, which we watched the Jackie Chan movie a couple weeks ago, I mean, the plot was a little bit nonsensical, but this one you're like, oh, okay, they want to get him in there, and sure, this armed martial arts contest is a good enough excuse.
Yeah, it's a good front. I mean,
and then then he's busting the heroin ring, and so I'm just saying that as far as a martial arts movie, this thing made sense, and I appreciated just that, I didn't have to turn off part of my brain and say, oh, well, whatever, I'm just here for the fights. There's actually some plot to it. And I one last thing on that. I'm glad they refrained from, for example, writing in a romantic scene between Bruce Lee and the female officer who was there undercover as well. I was glad that they stayed away from all that stuff.
I mean, it may have been too early in the genre's life for that to really be a trope to be used.
Right.
I couldn't tell you one way or the other. I mean, to a degree, I see your point. My only frustration is you only really have two characters that are really, truly worth emotionally investing in, and neither of them are the main character. Everybody talks about how Lee is this great martial artist and who was a perfectionist and really brilliant in his craft, and you can see that on screen. But he wasn't given the just stardom or support story-wise for his star to really shine. That's my only argument, really.
Right.
Is that. Otherwise, I think the movie's pretty good, and I would recommend it. Would you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, especially if, like me, you've never seen it. It's definitely worth investing the time in. So, what a point of transition to talk about stars shining. Our other film is Girls Trip. Now, had you seen Girls Trip before?
I had not. I've seen many interviews with Tiffany Haddish, who, I'm going to be frank with you, I found absolutely hilarious in every one of her interviews I've ever seen. This movie is amazing, but I want to let you shine a light on what the plot, and I use that word very loosely, is.
Sure. In this film, we are introduced to four friends at the time that they're going through college, journalism degrees. The four friends are tight. They are the Flossy Posse. And they do a very good job, I thought, at the intro of this movie, sort of narrating through the first, say, 15 years after they've graduated college. That they would get together periodically, but then that's kind of occurred less often, and then there've been some falling out. So here we are now. I don't know. They say 15 years afterwards, approximately, something like that. That, now one of them, Ryan, is an incredibly successful second coming of Oprah, as they called her at one point. I love that. So she has been offered the chance to be the keynote speaker at the Essence Awards in New Orleans. And so she decides to invite her three friends with her to come have a girls' weekend at the same time. And that begins the girls' trip. So then we meet, the other ones, and again, there's a little bit of nice, for example, they takes a little bit of time to introduce each of the characters, which always like to have some backstory. So
Yeah.
we meet Sasha, Queen Latifah, who is a sort of, what would you describe her job as?
I couldn't even begin to.
Yeah, she works for like she has a gossip website,
Yeah.
and she's
Blogger,
down.
maybe.
Yeah,
Blogger would probably be the best way to explain it.
yeah,
Well,
yeah, and
you not a YouTuber, but like one step above that.
yeah, yeah. And then Lisa, who is sort of the button down nurse. Now she's a mother of two kids, but was a wild party girl in her day, played by Jada Pinkett Smith. And Dina, played by Tiffany Haddish, who you
Uh-huh.
mentioned, who is just all out, the wild child of the crew. And the rest of the movie is them down in New Orleans, interacting, and Ryan, the lead woman who has the keynote address, is feuding with her husband, which becomes a very important plot thread of the movie because even though she proclaims how you can have it all, her marriage is actually not doing so well. And there are many crazy moments in New Orleans, a lot of friendship, some good heart-to-heart moments,
A
and
bit
I
of
got to be honest
bonding.
about this part, a fairly predictable ending.
Yeah.
So, it does wrap up fairly well, but this so I'll just say that this movie is a excellent sort of buddy comedy road trip movie, but is set apart by having four women of color as opposed to your typical sort of four white guys doing the same thing. So
I
Chike,
mean,
tell me how you love this movie.
this movie is the anti-Hangover,
That's right.
and I love it for that reason. Here's the thing: Jada Pinkett Smith is not an actress that I've loved throughout the years. In fact, kind of the reverse. Like, she's not really appealed to me except when she's had starring roles in TV shows. She had a show not too long ago called Hawthorne where she was a nurse, and she was the most credible thing about that show. And here she gets to play almost the straight man to all this craziness.
I, I would say Ryan is the closest to the straight man, but yeah, yeah.
And for me, like, I believe that she knocks it out of the park with this, with everything that happened within this film. But if we're honestly kidding, it's Tiffany Haddish and her reactions to everything that goes on in the entire film that makes it worth watching. Because you never know how she's going to react, and you never know what's going to come out of her mouth, and you never know what crazy scheme she's going to come up with to react to what's going on around her. And it's like watching a toddler find different things within a zoo. You just
She
don't
actually
know what they're gonna
remind
grab, what they're gonna touch, what they're gonna try and ride. That's who Tiffany Haddish is in this movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say she
Um,
reminded me of some
for
friends of
me,
mine from college. I had friends in college who were just, you're like, who's keeping an eye on him because he's just gonna go do something really stupid.
and here's the thing:
Yeah.
we all need the crazy one.
Sure. No, absolutely right. I mean, so okay, so let's talk about. I mean, to me, that's one of you mentioned it was the anti-hangover, right? So each of the movies has some point where the characters bond, even though they're different, and they realize they're all important. But I mean, I just think this movie did a much better job at that. I much more believed them, going through that sort of awakening than say Zach Galifianakis in The Hangover, or really, I mean, most of the other sort of guy versions of Girls Trip.
And here's the thing that make it's not that it was a women centered movie that made it make all the money. It's that these people who you were spending that hour and a half with, or hour 45 with, are relatable humans. They're not. always going to be doing the crazy stuff. They value their career and where they came from and where they're going to, but they can also know very well how to let their hair down and the chaos of what happens when you let your hair down. Now, The Hangover had the exact same premise with four white dudes, and that's kind of the reason it made money, but it made money because it was a fantasy. No one would ever go out and do anything really that crazy where they would end up in Mike Tyson's room, listen to him sing Genesis in the air tonight with a tiger and somewhere around. Nobody would do that. None of that. That's fantasy. What happened with these women is it's like they went on an uphill climb. They started up pretty normal. They got to a point of success. They rode that point of success as far as it could go, and then they realized, while I don't hate my life, I don't nearly enjoy it as much. And everybody feels that at some point, whether that's within a marriage, within a job, within where they're living in a city. We all long for that change, and usually the one that gives us that push is the crazy friend to get us to really think out of our own mindset. And by that, it brings us closer to who we want to be. It may not keep us there forever, but at least it gets us moving in a direction we hadn't thought of. And that's kind of the real brilliance of why Girls Trip made as much money as it did, because it's a relatable film about women growing and changing, and the upside and the downside of that, and how it can change you. But Sanford, from one male to another male, what did you think of Girls Trip? Was it worth the trip for you?
Yeah, I mean, I had fun watching this movie. You mentioned it was an hour and a half movie, and then you said hour 45. I wish this movie had been an hour and a half. I think it would have been a tighter movie. A couple of the things that I actually, the more crazy parts, for example, like when they drink the absinthe and they're essentially tripping, or the whole scene swinging overhead and between over the street, those more crazy scenes, they felt like pasted into me, or they were out of tone with a lot of the rest of the movie. So I kind of feel like parts of that could have been cut out, and it would have been a tighter movie if they had actually focused more on the characters. I mean, I'm not usually the person saying that, but it's like, yeah, I know it's a crazy comedy at times, but they were doing such a good job with the other part that you referenced. I just felt like those other things were sort of pasted on. And by the way, usually we talk about Chekhov's gun, Chekhov's swing in this one, right?
For me, the one thing that dragged was the hallucination scene.
Yeah, that I really could have done with. And honestly, not only could I have done without it, it wasn't that funny, and it didn't make sense in the context of the rest of it, because here's Ryan kind of getting all crazy and not able to keep her her thoughts together during this important meeting, and yet it doesn't seem to have any impact on the rest of the plot.
Right.
So
and for me, like, go ahead.
No, I just was going to say, I mean, I just feel like sometimes, people get enamored of a scene, and then, maybe, with retrospect, you'd be like, yeah, that could have gone. The other thing, I just want to say, the other thing that sort of makes this movie, the rhythm of it kind of keeps changing, was the music scenes. Mm-hmm. And I liked the music scenes. I actually felt like they really worked in this movie. First of all, there was actually a plot point to them going to the music shows. But then also there's just a lot of, really great acts that they had a chance to film. But that was one where it's kind of unsatisfying, because you see like 15 seconds of an act. Here's Common for 10 seconds. Here's Boys to Men for 12 seconds. And I just, to me, it's a little bit of, okay, I get it. But, if you're going to do that, do more of it, or maybe don't do it. I don't know. What do you think about the music part of it? I'm talking myself.
It kind of felt very TV series-ish to me. Like, it's kind of the thing you would insert in a TV series episode. Then, like, two friends, like you could put that in like an episode of Sister Sister. They go to a music festival. Who do they run into? Oh, they run into Boys II Men. Who they run into after that? They run into Lil Bow Wow. It could have been anybody really.
Right.
And it's one of those things where it's like you're using that, and it's great if it ties in. Again, she's going to the Essence Awards, so you're gonna have fun stops along the way. And you're in New Orleans, so that's a music city, so that makes sense. But
Well,
like
like that's where like the street band was more fun to me, and you know,
exactly.
yeah, I mean, I spent some time in New Orleans for work actually, but you know, I spent some time in New Orleans, so you know, I thought actually I really preferred that, or if they had, I would have preferred some more scenes, maybe. You know, there was one scene in a dance club on Bourbon Street, but maybe some more with the music on Bourbon Street or something like that. But
Yeah,
anyway,
but I
we're
mean
nitpicking. We're
that
nitpicking.
would make it in a way over authentic in my mind.
Yeah. All right. So exit question on this one because I got to keep an eye on the clock. Do you recommend this movie?
Of course, if you need a serious belly laugh, and you like Queen Latifah and you like Jada Pinkett, and you have a fascination with who's this Tiffany Haddish person, watch this movie. Watch it, laugh, feel good for that hour 45, hour 50.
Right.
You'll have a bit more fun with it than you would Enter the Dragon, unless you're a really big martial arts fan.
Well, they make a
Um,
nice double feature. I mean, you know, sort of complementing each other in different ways. But,
it's how we've been doing this month, and next week is pretty much going to be a wrap up week. So the real mystery is what's the last martial arts film gonna be?
Mm.
You'll find out next week on our next week's edition of Real Reviews Home Edition or Real Reviews Rewind Home Edition. I'm Chike Coleman, and that's Sanford. We will see you next week. Bye, guys.